So now we're going to start working on the upload video feature. Remember how our raw videos bucket is not public, because at the very least, we want to authenticate users before we let them upload a video. So how can we handle that logic? Well, Google Cloud Storage provides something called signed URLs, which are short-lived and can be created server-side with privileged credentials, and they can give temporary access to upload files in our case. You could also use them to download files, but that's obviously not what we're looking to do. And I'm going to show you the entire code how to do it, but I do want to mention that I'm not just making this up. I'll link this below, and this is like kind of the code sample that I'm like basing the code that we're going to be writing off of. So now let's hop into the code. Where do you think we should generate that signed URL? Probably not on the web client. I mean, Next.js does support API routes, but I prefer to have like a separation of concerns because we probably can't build our entire API in the web client on Next.js. So why even start? Like, let's just put all of that in the API service, which we know is going to run in the backend, and we don't have to worry about like accidentally exposing some of our credentials or anything like that in client-side components by accident or something. In our functions, we're going to add another function. We could put it in another file, but we're not going to put too much code here, so we might as well use a single file just to keep things simple. But first things first, let's actually move into that directory, which is YouTube API client, and then into the functions directory, because that's where our NPM project actually is. And we're going to install a dependency. This one might look familiar to you, Google-Cloud/storage, because we used it in the video processing service. So we're going to be using it here again as well. So one, we're going to import that. I think we're importing storage from Google Cloud Storage, and I'll get rid of these because I already know it's going to complain about it. And then we're going to instantiate an instance. And I believe this is exactly what we did in the video processing service. I'll even show you the code in a second just to prove it to you. Yeah, let's check it out. In the video processing service, probably in the storage file, we at the top imported storage and created an instance of it. Yeah, let's also actually copy and paste the bucket name, which I guess this is some duplicate code, but it's not the end of the world to have a hard-coded string like that, especially because we're only doing it a single time. But you can kind of see this might be a good place to have some type of config storage where we can share these types of hard-coded constants between multiple services. We won't be doing that in this course just to keep things simple. But now there's actually one more import that we're going to make, and we're actually going to be importing callable functions, which we can do like this. I think on call, this is version 1 Firebase functions, but we can actually now use the new version 2 functions, and I'll quickly show you the difference. There's actually 2 documentation pages, but they're pretty similar. You can see it on Firebase functions docs, and you can also see it on Google Cloud Function docs because they are like the same service, Cloud Functions and Firebase functions. There's a quick table here. The request timeout is a lot longer for Gen 2 functions. You can use a lot more resources, and this is probably the big one, a lot more concurrent requests. And yeah, so in general, they're just like objectively better, I would say. Though I don't think they entirely support all functionality. Like for example, in our code, this create trigger, when a user is created, this function is actually a generation 1 function because it's not supported with generation 2 just yet. But when generation 2 is supported, we probably want to go with it. So that's what I'm doing here. Now I'm going to create a function to generate a signed URL on the server, and I'll call it just that, generate upload URL. It's going to be an on-call function. You'll see what that is in a bit, but basically it's just an easy way to invoke it from the client side. Like we don't even have to specify the HTTP endpoint. We only will have to specify the name of the function. That's going to make things pretty easy for us. I'm also in this case going to specify the max number of instances, because if I don't, we're actually going to get, I think, an error, because there is like a limit to our max number of instances unless we like change the quota on Google Cloud. But that's not something I'm going to get into. It's not like super hard to figure out, but you probably don't want to have a bunch of max instances anyway, because you might end up with like a high bill. Well, probably not unless you have a lot of traffic, but you get the point. And so the second parameter here is going to be the callback. It's going to be an asynchronous function. You'll see why in a bit, but it's going to take some request and respond. And before we even start getting into generating the signed URL, we want to make sure that the user who's calling this is authenticated. Now, you might think from the client side, we have to manually pass in our credentials, but actually that's the good thing about callable functions. Firebase kind of does that for us. It will be in the request like this. So what we're going to do is check if the user is authenticated, and we can do that by checking the request.auth field. And if it's undefined, which it might be, It can either be auth data or undefined. If it's undefined, we can check that with the not. And if it is, then we'll throw an exception and return. So in Firebase functions, this is kind of a standard way to do that. We can say failed precondition, and the message we can give is the function must be called while authenticated. So nothing crazy there. Now we're actually going to extract a few things from the request. We're going to extract that auth, and you'll see why in a second. I've been saying that a lot, but it is kind of true. And we're also going to get the data, which this is actually something that we can explicitly specify when we are calling this request. We can pass any data we want. And in our case, we're going to pass in the file name. You'll see why. Also, we're going to instantiate an instance of our raw videos bucket so that we can actually interact with it. So let's do this. Storage bucket. This is the storage that I declared at the top of the file. And let's pass in the raw videos bucket name. And now I'm going to copy and paste a bit of code from the documentation. So this is how we can generate a signed URL. With our bucket, we can pass in the file name. This is what the file name is going to be after the user uploads their file. We disregard the file name of their local file that they're uploading, and we give it a new name once it's been added to the bucket. And there's a few other things here we specify. Version 4, that's just like the newest version of like signed URLs. The action is writing because we want to upload a file, and this URL that we're creating is only going to be valid for 15 minutes. That means the user has to start uploading the file within 15 minutes. What happens if we have duplicate file names? Well, we can ensure that we never do because we're the ones who generate this file name, and we're going to generate it server side. Who cares about the file name that the user is actually uploading, because this URL has to be generated before they even specify that. But actually, that's not entirely correct because we need the file name, the file's extension to match. So here, when we actually generate a unique file name, and I'll call it just that, file name, and we want it to be unique, that's not super hard. We can actually just take the authentication ID, the user ID, and also join it with like the current date, and that's pretty much guaranteed to be unique unless like a user is uploading two files at the exact same time, somehow maybe with two windows or something, because this should be accurate down to the second. And we could even generate like another random string if we wanted to, but I think this is mostly good enough. Lastly, like I said, we do need to specify the file extension of the file that the user is uploading. We won't know that until the user actually specifies which file they want to upload. So that's what we're using this data parameter for. From the client, after the user selects the video that they're uploading, it could be an MP4, it could be a .mov, who knows what format it is, but the format does have to match at the destination. Not for the file upload, but when we actually run our video processing code on it, because the video processing code needs to know the format of the file name. How do I know that? Because I tried doing it without the file extension earlier and I ran into a bug. So trial and error is pretty important sometimes in development. So here we're going to expect that the data that we pass in has an attribute called file extension. We don't have static typing for that, unfortunately. So that's going to be our responsibility on the client to pass that in. And then this will be the new unique file name, and this will be the generated URL that we get. And ultimately, that's what we're going to return. We're going to return the URL, and I might as well return the file name also just for debugging purposes so we know what file to look for on the cloud storage bucket. But this is, I believe, the entire code. I just want to make sure I have my await here because we definitely want to await that before we try to return the URL. So I think we're good here. So now I'm actually going to go ahead and deploy this, and we could run the npm run script. I think that's specified here, npm run deploy, which will deploy all the functions. But since we only updated one function, we only added one, we didn't really make any changes to this guy. We don't have to redeploy it. And there's a clever, well, it's not clever, but there's a way to do that. And that is by Firebase deploy -- only functions, and then colon, the name of the function, which in our case is generate upload URL. We might get some linting errors, and if that's the case, we'll quickly fix them. Okay, so the upload actually was successful. There's a couple more things I actually want to show you though. If you go to Cloud Functions, you'll now see that the function is deployed, and you'll see that yes, it is a second generation function. You can also see it in the Firebase console, but there's not nearly as much information within the Firebase console. It will actually direct you, I think, to Google Cloud if you click one of those options. But if you click on generate upload URL here, you'll see at the top right that this is powered by Cloud Run. Yeah, under the hood, this is actually creating a Cloud Run instance. If you don't believe me, let me take you to the Cloud Run UI and refresh this. And you'll see, yep, there's a new service here, generate upload URL. Looks like it got rid of our uppercase though, but that's okay. And this one does allow all traffic, but I'm not going to go super into that. You can see here it's actually deployed by Cloud Functions, so there is that detail. Now, back here, you can go to this function's details, and we need to actually grant this function some permissions before it can actually generate signed URLs. There's two things we need to do. The first one is take this service account. Service accounts in Google Cloud are basically a way to grant permissions on a more granular basis. Like for this function, we could, specify the exact permissions we want this to have. We could even change the service account, I believe, if we wanted to. I think that's just the default service account. So yeah, if you were to go on the details, edit it, scroll all the way down, you could see that, yeah, you can choose the service account if you really want to, but I'm not going to do that. We're just going to take the default service account, copy, paste it. And then we're actually going to go to our raw videos bucket in cloud storage. You can do that by, finding the bucket. And under the permissions tab, you'll click that over here. And you're going to want to scroll down and go to grant access. You'll copy and paste the principal here and then click it. And then you're going to assign it a role. And in this case, we want to go under cloud storage over here and then grant it the storage object admin role and then go ahead and click save. I won't do that because I think I actually already granted it. You can see it over here. If I control F, yeah, that's the exact one and it has that role. But wait, there's more. There's one other permission issue you're going to run into, and I know because I ran into it myself. You're going to want to go to the IAM page, IAM admin. And this is kind of where you can manage most permissions in Google Cloud. And in my case, again, I already granted it the permission, but here you're going to find all of the service accounts that you have. You can control F and find the one that we copy and pasted. So for this same one, we want to grant it a role. And specifically, you're probably going to click add another role. And then you're going to find that role, which is going to be service account token creator. You can probably just type in token creator and it'll be this one, service account token creator. You can see I already actually added it up above here. So I have a duplicate here. So I'm just going to get rid of this, but this is the one that you're going to want, service account token creator. And then you'll click save. And in my case, there weren't any changes made, but now you should actually be good to generate signed URLs from your function. Next up, we'll be adding this feature to the UI and actually testing it out end to end.